Well, this is a total catastrophe, but how much of a catastrophe? What the hell is actually going on? I think this is quite an interesting question to navigate, which is what the hell are they doing this for? Might seem like a basic, obvious question, but one that is still actually worth interrogating. And what's going on with Western leaders? What's going on with the fragmenting West already, the kind of cohesion of the West falling apart, but the likes of Keir Starmer, who's set himself up as a poodle to Trump, to be honest. Others are taking different stances. What's that all about? Well, I'm really delighted to be talking to Dave Waring, who is assistant professor in international relations at the University of Sussex and a Middle East specialist, written extensively on the likes of the Saudi regime and so on. Great to chat to you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, mate. How are you?
Well, given the world's gone to shit.
Yeah,
not ideal. Yeah. It's just, you just kind of look back at, 10, 12, 15 years ago. I don't want to go all, this is not like a liberal who were like, oh, this is oasis of calm and stability. And then but it is a bit, isn't it? Like you get your phone out, you get a notification, you're like in the brace position.
We thought it was bad 20 years ago. Just after the financial crash, we thought that was bad. We thought early austerity was bad. This is something else, isn't it?
It was just, everything's just spiraled out of control. Okay, let's just start. I want to hear a big Dave Waring take on what the hell is going on here. Why did they do this? Let's ask basic, questions. Why the hell have they done this? What are they trying to get out of it? And, what's the method in what looks to a lot of people like absolute madness?
There's minimal method here. I think that's the takeaway. I mean, we were talking before we came on the recording, like comparing it to the war on terror, comparing it to the post 9/11 neoconservative attempt to like recreate the Middle East through violence, firstly invading Iraq, supposedly topping the Iraqi government and then replacing it with a compliant, stable US-aligned Iraqi government, and then potentially going on to other countries, including Iran. They were thinking about Iran for a while. And obviously that was a complete catastrophe. We don't need to rehearse the history. But I think the fundamental point there is the neoconservatives at least had a clear strategy. It was a bad strategy. It was bad in the sense that there was a lack of competence. There was a lack of thinking it through that seriously. It was bad in the sense that it was just morally wrong because it was imperialism, and it was bad in the sense that it was illegal. But they had something there in terms of a big picture account of what they wanted to achieve. Here, I don't think we can even discern that. Like if you were to ask a neoconservative 20 years ago, what are you trying to do? They could tell you, and you would be alarmed and horrified at what they were saying to you, but they would say something broadly coherent, like it would have its own internal logic, right? Now here, I was reading a New York Times article, which was an account of an interview that the New York Times had with Donald Trump, I think the day after the aggression started. He had this 12-minute phone conversation with the New York Times, in which he tried to articulate his thinking. And he couldn't even keep his story straight within those 12 minutes. He couldn't even give a clear view as to is this regime change where you want the people to rise up and overthrow the regime? Or is it a Venezuela scenario where you just cut the head off the regime and then do a deal with whoever's in the layer underneath? Something else we've heard from Trump is that, we had an idea about who we wanted to take over after we killed the Grand Ayatollah, but it turns out those people are dead as well, as if it's not his war, And we hear all sorts of things. I'm sure you've covered it on other episodes. All sorts of things from different people in the administration as to what they're trying to achieve, how long it will take, what the circumstances were when the war started. So it seems to me that we could talk about all sorts of structural reasons why the United States is hostile to Iran, why the United States has wanted to either contain Iran or effect regime change in Iran. Structural reasons, established reasons, long-term reasons, which go back, 50-odd years since the 79 revolution. And those are the big structural causes for why this is happening. But in terms of the proximate cause, the trigger, it's a mess. It's a complete mess. It's a mess of Donald Trump's instincts Donald Trump's very strange and worrying personality, who's in the room with him, who's lobbying him, whether it's American hawks like Lindsey Graham, a very hawkish senator, whether it's Benjamin Netanyahu, whether it's this horrific macho Secretary of War, he calls himself, Pete Hegseth, a guy who's clearly got issues. And just the lack of, because the regime is so chaotic, because the American government is so chaotic, because it's badly run, it's just really hard to get a clear picture of what the causal factors are, who's saying what to whom, and there's no clear story because they haven't got a clear story themselves. So it's really hard to unpack. And look, the bottom line here, like the neoconservatives, going back to that analogy, they had a plan, they had a clear narrative, went horribly, horribly wrong. These guys don't even have a clear plan or narrative. So do we imagine it's going to go better? And no, it's not. Apart from the fact that Iran's a far more, a formidable target than Saddam Hussein's Iraq was. So this is not shaping up to be good. If they're going to keep pushing with this for the next few weeks, even months, it's going to turn incredibly ugly.
Let's talk about other Western leaders, and let's focus on Keir Starmer. Now, some might do a little defense of Keir Starmer. They might go, well, he said, what I was not prepared to do on Saturday was for the UK to join a war unless I was satisfied there was a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. So he's saying this isn't lawful and doesn't have a thought-through plan. But it's also just worth noting that the Telegraph says that Ed Miliband led cabinet opposition to US military action in Iran and the use of Britain's bases. In a meeting on Friday ahead of the strikes, Mr. Miliband, Rachel Reeves and Yvette Cooper understood to have strongly opposed British support for preemptive military action, which they believed would be illegal, just as per what the law says. Then it says Keir Starmer backed them and resisted pressure from Donald Trump to allow the US to fly bombing runs to Iran from RAF bases, then changed his position less than 48 hours later, and says that in the next few days they will fly limited defensive missions. So some might go, well, come on, is it that bad? He's, not thrown himself in the way Tony Blair did, maybe. What's your take on what's actually going on there?
I think that this debate that we've had in British politics and British political discourse the last few days has just been a farce, a complete pantomime. On the one hand, we've got right-wingers, conservatives saying we've betrayed the special relationship, we've betrayed Donald Trump, it's an abrogation of Britain's duty to Anglo-American relations. On the other hand, we've got people on the centre-left and not a few political journalists describing this as Keir Starmer's kind of Hugh Grant moment, where he stands up to this bullying American president and draws himself up to his full height and says, no, I won't do it because I believe in international law and all this garbage. I mean, it just doesn't conform with reality. If we think about the chain of events, it's been absolutely clear for months, or certainly many weeks, that the Americans are quite likely going to attack Iran. And with Israeli help, most probably. We've seen this huge build-up of American armor in the region, especially naval forces in the Persian Gulf. I mean, this is stuff that you can literally see from space. So it would have been no surprise to Keir Starmer when this war. Well, we know it's no surprise to Keir Starmer when this war started, but it's probably no surprise to him when he got the call from Donald Trump saying, "Can we use your bases?" It seems to me that this was clear to the British for a long time. Now, if you think that the Americans are going to attack Iran, then if that happens, the Iranians will respond in the way that they have done. I've been following this stuff now for a quarter of a century. I remember the first time there was serious talk about attacking Iran in 2005, like between the conquest of Iraq, the supposed conquest of Iraq, and the Iraqi civil war starting, which is when they had started having second thoughts. In that little period when the neocons were ascendant and where apparently neoconservatives were saying, anyone can go to Baghdad, real men go to Tehran. That's what these neocons were saying. The same kind of machismo as we've seen from Hegseth. When discourse was going on, experts analysing this were saying this will be a disaster because the Iranians will do, and then describing precisely what the Iranians have done. So everything that's happened, everything that's happened in the last few days has been entirely predictable, entirely predictable. If Keir Starmer cares that much about British civilians in the region, which he should, and British allies as well, then what he should have been doing for the last couple of months at least, since it was obvious that the Americans were gearing up for a potential assault, is lobby the Americans hard not to do it. Not just say, oh, well, if you do it, we won't participate, at least initially, but then we might start participating after a few hours once the Iranians have retaliated. He should have been saying, no, you must not do this. There are British civilians in the region, hundreds of thousands of them. You'll be putting them at risk. The world economy will be put at risk. If we get involved in it, there'll be potentially a terrorist backlash against us in the same way as we had on 7/7 in London. You'll be giving Vladimir Putin a windfall because the oil price will go through the roof, and that would be great for the Russians. It will drag the Middle East into a huge catastrophe, and it will be a global economic crisis as well as a global security crisis. If he had any responsibility about him, he would have been doing all that. And instead, what it seems to me that what he's basically done is say, I can't support you initially because it wouldn't be legal. However, if you were to come to me later on with a request, when I say later on, I mean 24, 36 hours afterwards, and say, the Iranians are retaliating in this way, and can you come in and act and contribute to defensive operations, then I could support you. And this seems to me just kind of a Weasley way of going along with it, with a degree of plausible deniability. I've got no problem with British assets being used to shoot down Iranian drones and Iranian missiles if they're being lobbed at civilian targets. I don't think anyone can credibly oppose that. But the British are doing a bit more. The British are giving the Americans use of British bases to attack Iranian assets on the ground. Now, you can argue that that is justifiable because it prevents Iran from attacking civilian targets in the Gulf, but you can't disentangle that from the wider aggression. That's the sort of thing the Americans would have been doing as part of their aggression, even if Iran had only hit back at military targets. That's just a standard part of the aggression. You're taking out the Iranian military, you're degrading the Iranian military as part of your war of aggression. The British are helping them do that. Even if this military action the British are undertaking or participating in now was going along with a lobbying to stop the war, if that makes sense, if the British were on the one hand British planes shooting missiles and drones out of the sky, and on the other hand saying to Donald Trump, you must stop this, then you could say Starmer is having his Hugh Grant moment. But it seems to me that he's not doing that, and he's not doing that because he's prioritising the relationship between the British state and the American state over British national security and over international security as well. So it's far from impressive.
And the posturing he's doing is actually just because, public opinion opposes this war by decisive margin. The Labour Party's just been defeated by the Green Party in a by-election. So he's not coming out doing a tub thumping way in we go because he knows he's under political pressure. So this is presentation, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And I think it's kind of threading the needle. If you think about, I think what you say is exactly right. If you think about the position of the British government, on the one hand, they want to stick very close to the Americans, as they always do, even if it's a neo-fascist in the White House, even if it's a genocidal neo-fascist in the White House, they want to stick close to the Americans. At the same time, as you mentioned, they've got these political problems at home with regard to the Greens, which is existential for the Labour Party. At the same time, I think they are genuinely worried about international law. We're signed up to the International Criminal Court in a way that the Americans aren't. We're a kind of middle power that does need international law when it suits us. The British state needs international law when it suits us. The rest of us need international law all the time, And there's an element as well. European powers, middle powers, needing to appeal to international law and the rules-based international order to legitimize their international relations. So he's trying to have all of these things. He's trying to thread the needle between all these different things. And the way he's come out is, I need a plausibly deniable way of participating in this a way that can look legal and look justifiable and even make me look like I'm standing up to Donald Trump. But it's clear, and like from the reporting you mentioned, his initial instinct was just to join in with the whole thing, and his cabinet brought him back from that. But yeah, this is exactly what's happening. It's an attempt to thread the needle between these different considerations, but it's ended up as, in part, participation in the most frightening war of aggression we have seen in the modern era, beyond Iraq, even, I would say.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I guess a way of contrasting and comparing is Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain. Can you talk us through what's the position his government's taken, which I guess could show us a different approach, which Starmer could have taken by a centre-left politician?
I think this is a really interesting case because as you know, I'm not going to like weigh in as a major expert on Spanish politics, but like my understanding is that Pedro Sanchez is not like he's not like a comrade. You know what I mean? He's not the Spanish Jeremy Corbyn.
He's like Andy. He's the Spanish Andy Burnham, by the way.
Right.
It's a good way of framing him. But he's in coalition with the left. He has to be in coalition with the left there. So people like with Jeremy Corbyn's politics are in the Spanish government as junior partners.
Okay, so maybe that's pulled him to the left a little bit, and you know, he's probably got a constituency out there which he's thinking about how to appeal to, and this probably plays well for that constituency.
Spanish society overwhelmingly opposed, even more so than Britain.
And look, when they were involved in 2003, remember it was Blair, the Spanish Prime Minister, and George W. Bush who announced the initial attack. There was a terrorist attack in, I think it was Madrid, shortly afterwards, and the Spanish pulled out. So there's probably some of those memories, you know, playing in.
Well, on that, it was during the general election, the Spanish general election, and the Conservative government tried to suppress that it was an Al-Qaeda attack. They tried to present it as being separatists within Spain in order to stop it being shown, obviously, as a consequence of Spain's foreign policy of supporting the war. Yeah.
I mean, well, okay, this all just really helps us to understand the kind of background. And so Sanchez has said, you know, we're not going to allow you access to bases in Spain, but he's gone beyond that because, you know, Starmer's done that to a degree as well, or did it to a degree. But he's also come out and said, like, clearly, this is wrong, it's destabilising, and he's been quite forceful about that. Whereas Starmer hasn't really criticised this. He's made some indirect comments where, you know, we don't do regime change from the skies and this kind of thing. He's not said directly to Trump, you shouldn't be doing this. He's not made any effort in a sustained way over the last couple of months to lobby Trump against doing this. And what he could have done is he could have galvanized international opinion against it. So if the British are against it, that's a power with a seat on the UN Security Council. I know we talk down Britain a lot in terms of its power in the world system, but just because it hasn't got an empire doesn't mean it's a trivial country. It's still probably one of the top 10 most powerful, influential countries in the world, even if it's in that second tier. And what you can do with that diplomatically is you can rally others to this kind of message. There are governments out there in the world, states out there in the world, who are far more vulnerable to the Americans than we are. I'm talking about South Africa, Brazil, stuff like that, countries like that. You've got the Spanish as well. Britain could have been in there galvanizing a broad swathe of international opinion and putting pressure on the Americans in the same way as Trump backed down over Greenland in the face of significant opposition. Maybe he doesn't back down, but maybe he does. I mean, you've got to at least try, given how dangerous it is and given how much, you know, you supposedly care about British nationals in the Gulf. And there's been pushback on Spain, for sure. But it's noticeable how the Europeans have come in on the side of the Spanish, notwithstanding the fact that individual European states, especially the French and the Germans, have taken a similar position to Starmer. When Sanchez speaks out and Donald Trump pushes back against him, the Europeans come to Sanchez's aid. You know, that sense of EU solidarity, and without wanting to sound like a Ramona, it shows another reason why we should never have left. especially now in this horrible geopolitical environment. The idea that this Britain is just, floating in the mid-Atlantic at the whims of the Americans and outside of that protective kind of relationship with the EU is like, we're seeing the folly of that seriously at the moment.
What do you think this means for the West then? Because, I mean, it is my thesis, the West is in quite acute decline, the American-led West, and it's fragmenting as well. And it's quite interesting, actually, despite, you can see in terms of Starmer in particular, his, continuing to defer to US hegemony in the way British prime ministers have done over and over again. The blood price, as Tony Blair put it. And obviously it was mostly Iraqi blood that was spilled, but he did spill British blood to pay the price for that relationship, so to speak. 179 British service personnel in Iraq, I believe, alone, for example. But I mean, the West is fragmenting as well, and you can see that. You can see that obviously over Greenland. You can see it. You see it over Ukraine as well. You can see it over the trade war, and you can see that now in terms of Macron's all over. He said it's an illegal war for a start. I mean, he's all over the place. And Mark Carney, who did the whole "it's the end of American supremacy," then backed this war, then backtracked on it. But nonetheless, what do you make of this in terms of what's going on with the West? Because some might go, well, actually, this will end. They're going to end up with a kind of more dominant in the Middle East, the US, so maybe they'll have the last laugh. Who knows? That's what that obviously was what they said during the Iraq War. But what's your just general take about where you think this leaves Western power in any sense you want to interpret that?
I think the word you use, hegemony, is really important. And I think it's worth thinking about what hegemony entails. Hegemony does not mean like raw dominance through economic and military and state power. That's not what hegemony is. And that's actually not what power is generally. Even the most authoritarian regimes, whether it's empires internationally or authoritarian regimes domestically, do not rely on force alone. There's always a sense of, there's a legitimating narrative which power can tell, and which enough kind of sectors of the population, enough power centers buy into for the whole thing to cohere. So, the dictator, the emperor, or the powerful state tells a story about the nature of its rule and why it's benign and why it's legitimate, and others buy into it. Not everyone buys into it. For those who don't buy into it, there's the mailed fist. But for others, there's a degree of reward, a degree of security. That's how power generally works, whether it's democratic power or authoritarian power. Now, with regard to the West, the general story has been, we hear it now and we laugh, but it's been a serious story, and it's been a serious basis for the West power, this rules-based international order. The idea being that, you have a UN Security Council, you have NATO, you have the EU, you have these various institutions characterized by liberal democratic values, trying to spread that around the world, like first during the Cold War and then post-Cold War, expanding it more broadly, going together with like neoliberal economics and in the post-Cold War era especially, and globalization, and being able to tell a story about greater prosperity, freer trade, more democracy, international cooperation. And yeah, the US dominates, but it's a benign kind of dominance, and most people are benefiting from it. And you can reason with the Americans, you can deal with them in a rational way. There'll be security guarantors and stuff like that. Now, all of that is breaking down in a really, really serious way. Like, you cannot tell that story, and like, stories are important to power. It's facile to think otherwise. Stories are crucial to power. You cannot tell that story when one of the two governing parties in the US is fascist. That doesn't work, not least because the origin myth of this whole US hegemony, this whole period of human history, US empire, the origin myth is the defeat of the Nazis. If one of the two parties is fascist, I know they're not the same as the Nazis, obviously, but this is a near-fascist government, right? You can't tell that story anymore. Many times in the history of American empire since 1945, there's been serious violations of international law, in Vietnam, in Iraq, blah, blah, blah. But I think there's just something about genocide, which is so, and the genocide in Gaza, which is so blatant and so ugly, and it's been brought to people's attention in such a visceral way through social media, and it's been so blatant as well and so shameless that I think it's really, really, it's made that story ridiculous, not just debatable, but ridiculous. And the other, so that's one thing. The story doesn't hold anymore. And the other thing is they can't and won't provide the security and prosperity, because if you can't tell the story, then you at least might be able to get people's acquiescence on the basis of, well, I still provide you security and you still live in a generally prosperous world because of the way I run the system. But that's not true either. When you're threatening Greenland, I mean, threatening to invade one of your allies, one of your allies. When you're refusing to defend Ukraine properly, when you're launching this just crazy, frightening war of aggression in Iran, God knows what the consequences of this will be for the global economy, then people can't rely on you for their security, they can't rely on you for their prosperity, and they can't even tell a kind of sympathetic story about why you're acting and the way you're acting. And so it's lethal for the West as a concept. That doesn't mean, look, raw American power will still be a big deal in the world system. It always will be, but it's not going to be in the same way as we've seen between that period between 1945 and the end of the Obama presidency. I mean, I suspect that really has gone, and the only way anything like that could come back would be if the Democrats came back into power and liquidated MAGA through the courts as treat them as an organised crime group and treat it as denazification. Because only then could other powers in the world system say, okay, we can now be assured that chapter is over.
Yeah.
And perhaps then you get back to something, like what we had before. But if they can't or won't do that, they'd be justified in doing it, by the way, because they are an organised crime group, But if they don't do that, then we're in just a completely dark place. We're in a different world, fundamentally different world from where we, have been in our lifetimes.
That's a very striking place to end it, I think. And I think really starkly frames exactly what's currently happening in terms of the war with Iran. We're only a few days in. Please like and subscribe. Your thoughts and your comments. Share the video. But Dave, honestly, big honour to chat to you again. And thanks for your wisdom.
Oh, thank you.